Hello, I want to welcome everybody to our webinar today. This is Tad Radzinski, and I want to thank you all for joining. Today we're going to be talking about supply chain integration, training, sales, and marketing, how to effectively implement the tools you've used and work with your supply chain to really drive things forward and move, get things really rolling with your whole sustainability initiative with your supply chain, as well as really getting employees engaged, getting your customers engaged, and getting the messaging out to the world about the great things you're doing as a company as you move forward with your supply chain strategies and that kind of thing. So anyway, I want to thank you all for joining, and as always, this is a continuation of our webinar series. We have a really good amount of people attending today, and I will plan to go through a series of slides here and present, and then please offer any questions or type them into the question box, and I'll be glad to answer them at the end. And I do really appreciate the questions because it does make it very specific and interesting for everyone, because I am jamming a lot of information into a very short amount of time. I just want to remind everybody that we're having our seminar on sustainable supply chain strategies on April 20th, and really encouraging people to register now, because we do develop customized training for everybody that comes to this. We have a good amount of people already registered. I think we have 5 or 6 different companies already coming, and they're all bringing multiple people. And we do limit attendance to between 30 and 40 individuals that can participate in this. But like I said, we do develop custom content, and once you register, you will be getting a survey, which will then allow us to understand exactly what you are working on within your organization and what you want to get out of the seminar, and we will develop the workshops specific to you and the workbook and that kind of thing. So really looking to get people signed up as soon as possible to help us really facilitate the development of the materials. So looking forward to having you come to the seminar, and a number of you that are on this webinar today are already signed up, so this is great. You're going to be getting a lot of pre-information, which is going to help you when we actually get into the seminar. So the last few webinars we've been talking about supply chain strategies and sustainability and how to integrate things into your everyday operations as you work with your suppliers. We've talked about the importance of it. We've talked about the risks of not working with your supply chain, but we also talked a lot about different tools you can develop, and we gave examples about supplier questionnaires and how to do audits with your suppliers. We also gave recommendations and suggestions and showed some examples of sustainable purchasing policies, and then responsible sourcing policies, different things that you could use to implement the sustainable supply chain strategies within your organization. And then we also talked a lot about also integrating sustainable requirements and specifications. If you are a manufacturer that's trying to get information from your suppliers in regard to chemical content or recycled content or material ingredients or different things like that, you're going to need to somehow make that a standard practice. And whether it's a questionnaire that you send, or if you use the software like Actio, or if you're making it more formal and really integrating into the specifications, that's where you can really drive things and get the suppliers really on board to support this, because we have struggled with this over the years of getting suppliers to be responsive and that kind of thing. And the more you can make it a requirement, and if it is a contractual requirement, it definitely will get a lot more information and definitely get a lot more responses that way. Even if you're not a manufacturer, if you're a company that's just reaching out to your suppliers and working with them. For example, on the screen here I show you what Wyndham is doing as part of their Wyndham Green program. They actually have a system and program for evaluating suppliers, and then there's a portal that their suppliers can go on. But basically, Wyndham has a commitment as part of their sustainable purchasing policy to source green and sustainable materials for all their different properties and hotels and resorts and whatnot. So you can see here on this list, these are different organizations that they've already vetted and are able to provide the materials and products that they're looking for, that their people at their different hotels and resorts can then utilize as suppliers for different green materials and things like that. So this is just one example of a tool that a company has developed in a way they implement it, but it all stems from having a policy on sustainable purchasing or responsible sourcing policy, whatever you want to call it, and then a means to effectively drive that into the organization. So one example of a tool that you could be using here. So for the rest of the discussion today, we're assuming that your tools have been developed, you're really ramping up your program, and where do you go next with this? So very important, just like with sustainability, we always preach the fact that we don't want sustainability to be some add-on program. We want it to become part of an organization's culture or their DNA, just the way they do business. Same thing with your supply chain strategy. As far as sustainability goes, this should not just be an add-on program. You need to make it institutionalized. You need to make it part of the way your purchasing folks go to market, your logistics folks, that everybody's on the same page. The research and development teams, the new product development teams, even your salespeople need to understand that having a sustainable supply chain strategy is really critical for you as an organization. And like I said before, it doesn't matter if you're a manufacturer or an organization that's buying all kinds of different products that are public facing or just part of your everyday operations. This just needs to be the way you do business. Even here in our company, we have a sustainable purchasing policy that we implement. We also have responsible sourcing. We have requirements if we have any events on where we get our food from for the events, what vendors we're going to work with. We try to do local sourcing, waste management methodologies, all these different things, but a lot of that came from understanding our supply chain, understanding what we wanted for them. And like I said, it's just the way we do business. We're putting on this seminar that we're getting ready for. We're definitely making sure we're using sustainably sourced food and beverages, and that it's going to be a low impact event and all that kind of thing. It's just working with the place we host the actual seminar. Those are requirements we built into the contracts with them as well. And another thing about any kind of sustainable supply chain, it is not the requirements of just sustainability professional within the organization or the environmental health and safety manager or just purchasing. Everybody that's involved has to have a role in the whole different implementation of this to be successful. And leadership is definitely required, and that's where most of you that are on the webinar today come in, because most of you are leading initiatives within your organization, whether you're the sustainability director or you're responsible for sustainable purchasing, or you're in engineering and you have to coordinate with all your suppliers to respond to lead requests. People want to know what is the lead requirement, how the products are meeting lead requirements, what recycled content's involved, what is the location of the sourcing and that kind of thing. So all these different things, depending on what your organization does, are going to be important, and understanding how you're going to after your suppliers and what the strategy is going to be very critical for that. So a really big thing that we need to talk about today is definitely preparing for not only current but future industry changes. And on this screen here, or on this slide, you're going to see a lot of examples of where we're going as a society. We are a certified B Corporation, and there's actually a whole network of B Corporations out in the market. There's, not only do you get preferential treatment for being a certified B Corp, but there's actually some organizations now that are looking to source or utilize B Corps as, a supplier or as a vendor or as a service provider and that kind of thing. So that's something that gets recognized quite often. And then there's also different apps and things you can have on your phone now, or if you're looking at the hospitality industry and you want to stay in a green hotel, you have some choices there. You can look at TripAdvisor's Green Leaders program, or you can look at Green Key to determine, where are their green hotels that you can utilize. And part of this whole thing is going to be effectively not only communicating with TripAdvisor or Green Key and having them audit you and evaluate you and do whatever they do to make sure that your messaging is correct, but they're going to be looking for the fact that you do have some type of sustainable supply chain strategy built into your organization. And then there's other things like Good Guide if you want to look at products, and there's a lot of questions I have around Good Guide and where the data really comes from, but I can tell you for a fact that there's a lot of young people out in the world, there's a lot of people in the world who use Good Guide, and they'll basically scan a barcode and it'll tell them some information about a certain product. And then here in Philadelphia, they have an initiative called My Milk Crate, which allows you to look at different organizations. And in this particular example, we selected construction. So the thing I'm trying to point out here is whether you're buying food, like down here about How Good, or if you're looking at, construction providers, there's all kinds of different apps, there's all kinds of different things that are available on the internet or on your phone right now that can allow you quickly to assess the sustainability of an organization. And there's going to be different things that are going to be involved there. If you are a company that's providing services or that kind of thing, people can definitely be looking up your, let's just say it's a hotel, they can be looking at TripAdvisor or Green Key, or they could be doing research on their phones to find out what the sustainability initiatives are for your organization. So you really want to be aware of these things. You want to be prepared. You want to make sure that the information you're providing is going to be friendly for phones. If you're putting things out on the internet, you got to make sure that everything's set up that when people view different things on their phones that they can actually see the information. And you got to be aware of what your customers are demanding. You got to be aware of what your competitors are doing, and you got to be thinking about the future. Just because you might have a certain base of customers right now, what are the customers you're going to have in the future? You want to consider that. And for companies that do this, you definitely will be a leader in the industry, and you're going to evolve over time, and you're going to definitely be successful. If you sit back and keep doing business the same old way, you're going to end up, having situations where you're probably going to lose business, or people aren't going to be as focused on your company and that kind of thing. And I talk about it a lot in the various teachings I do and webinars. You either evolve or go extinct. And in this new world we're in now that's very information intensive, having the ability to respond to different things like this and know that people are out looking at you. This brings up the next slide. I was actually just at a meeting a few weeks ago where we had a series of building products companies together, a whole group of them, and we were really talking about long-term sustainability for not only their business, but this particular industry organization that they were all part of. And what was really interesting was they started talking about the fact that if they look at demographics and they look at who buys their products, there's a big change coming. The millennials are coming. Millennials are the young folk that are in colleges now and getting out of school and that kind of thing, and they're all going to be the folks that are traveling. They're going to be the folks that are building houses. They're going to be the folks that are moving into apartments. And these millennials are very adept at using those different tools I just showed you on the previous slide, like Good Guide and TripAdvisor and all that kind of thing. But they also have a different mindset compared to, say, the baby boomer generation. The baby boomers are definitely aware of green and sustainable and that kind of thing, and a lot of them are focused on that. However, the millennials are a whole different group, and many of them, if you look at these statistics here, I'm not going to read all these, but a lot of them definitely have a belief that it's their responsibility to not buy products that are going to harm society or the environment. They also have a belief that it's important for companies to act in a way that benefits society. So when you see companies like Intel talking about where they're going as far as conflict-free minerals, Intel's obviously a big organization that it's involved in a lot of electronic and computer products, So this is the messaging they're putting out right there, understanding millennials' attitudes towards conflict-free minerals, because once people really understand what conflict-free is and why it's important, they know it's a very big deal, and they'll once they learn about it, they're definitely going to support that. So this is just an example of gearing up whenever you develop your sustainable purchasing policies, your responsible sourcing strategy. You got to think about how you're going to integrate that into the whole materiality assessment and sustainability strategy of your organization, and know who your customers are, because these are the folks that are going to be buying your products and services in the future. So another thing we've talked about also has been the dangers of an unsustainable supply chain. And again, I just want to reinforce the fact that, with the fact that we just had the big meetings in Paris, COP21, a lot of companies are really starting to realize now that the success of them reducing their carbon footprint or their climate risk or that kind of thing is going to be really to understand their supply chain, and understanding where they're getting their materials, where they're getting their products, very important. Also, from a social perspective, here's another example. This is a recent article that just came out about some folks that are working at Nike and some protesting that they're doing in regard to the pay they're getting and that kind of thing, and how police had to come in riot gear. So if I'm seeing this stuff, I can guarantee you that your customers are seeing this as well. And obviously this is not something you want to be involved in as you move forward. So again, keeping in mind, not only do you have to be ready to meet the requirements of a changing society and communicate that, but being aware of what's going in your supply chain so you don't end up in any of these headlines or have any issues like we saw with lumber liquidators and other folks that weren't really paying attention what was going on with their suppliers. It's really important to also understand that, for years, many of the organizations that we've worked with and many companies have kind of just basically focused on getting sustainability programs going on internally. They worked to really understand what their impacts were from their operations. And as these sustainability programs mature more, it is moving from more optional to mandatory, that you really understand what is happening in the supply chain. And just by showing you that information, I know from doing life cycle assessment, when we do a life cycle assessment of a product, the majority of the impacts are either coming from, typically coming from either the raw materials that are utilized or from the suppliers that are providing them. So understanding that information, both from an environmental and social perspective, is going to be really important as you develop not only the supply chain strategies, but the messaging that you're going to put out to the world, the training you're going to do for the different folks that you're working with. And remember, we talked about the fact that there's obviously going to be somebody responsible within your organization who has to worry about this. But in reality, we really want it to be set up that everybody who's involved in the organization touches the supply chain in some way or has some kind of connection to it, has a responsibility in it, not only for the implementation, but the communication, the education of your suppliers, your customers, stakeholders, that kind of thing. So this just shows an example of all the different folks that could seriously be involved when it comes to supply chain, sustainable supply chain strategies. Definitely the sustainability managers, definitely someone in the executive team is most likely going to be looking at this, but even down to accounting, and the purchasing and communications folks. The stories that you tell as an organization, it's going to be critical that you're clear on what your supply chain strategies are and how they're important to your organization and how that's going to be communicated out to all the stakeholders that you're dealing with. We say this all the time, collaboration is critical. Collaboration definitely leads to innovation, which leads to action. And this little triangle here gives you an idea that, primarily when you're thinking about an organization, whether you're a manufacturing company or you're a service provider, you definitely have employees, you definitely have customers, you definitely have suppliers, but who would be these stakeholders in the middle? Well, the stakeholders in the middle could be your shareholders, it could be government organizations that you deal with, it could be different NGOs, it all depends on, who's all involved here. It could be your banker, for example. We have situations right now where we're actually working on sustainable buildings, and the reason that some of these developers are going for LEED certification is the banks are requiring them to get LEED certified. So, and that all came not from the banks, but the institutional investors that were saying, hey, we want to support green activity and we want your money going to green projects. So that filtered all the way down to the folks building the buildings, which then eventually filtered down to all the suppliers, because in order to meet the LEED requirements, they have to be providing green products and sustainable products. And that eventually filtered down to the trades and the distributors and everything else. But there's so many connections here when you're looking at this, and having good collaboration is going to be really important. And that means definitely working with your employees internally to set up these programs, getting feedback from your customers, and also getting feedback from the suppliers, so you can develop an effective system of communication, and you can develop an effective means of implementing your sustainable supply chain strategies. We were actually just on a call right before this, and we were talking about planning for a supplier sustainability summit, which is coming up with this company. And a lot of the information that we're getting is we're doing pre-conference surveys to learn from the suppliers what's their knowledge of these different requirements that are coming, what kind of activities have they done, and then when the training comes, as we develop the training, it's going to be very specific based on those surveys that came back from the suppliers. So that's an example of collaboration and how you can start to get information that's going to really help you implement your programs. I say this in just about everything I do, the importance of training, it's so critical, but you really need to be training not only your internal people, that are the core folks that are dealing with the supply chain, but you're going to want to get other folks within the company, especially if they're working in new product development or sales, or if they have a hand in selecting products. Even if you develop a sustainable purchasing policy, you're going to have different folks in probably every division of the company that are going to be buying products and materials following that sustainable purchasing policy. So they're going to need to know about that. The same thing if you're developing a responsible sourcing policy. You're going to have to definitely get information out to the folks that have to utilize that and implement that. So when you think about it, if you are going to be training your new product development or R&D teams, you're definitely going to want to be sharing supplier data and information with these teams, letting them understand why that information is important, where they can get it. You would definitely want these folks to provide input into the development of the whole program. And then you definitely want them to understand the supply chain sustainability goals and how to achieve them. And this is going to be critical if you are a company that's manufacturing products, for you to meet all these different requirements that are coming down from your customers and from different green building standards and all kinds of things like that. And then if you're an organization that makes products and sells products, you're obviously going to have a sales and marketing team. But even if you're not, even if you're, say, a company that has, like Wyndham, that has a whole series of hotels and resorts, you still have a sales and marketing team that's got to be getting the messaging out. They're the ones that are going to be dealing with the trip advisors or the green key, or they're going to be also dealing with potentially Good Guide if you're selling products. So getting your sales and marketing team to understand what you're doing, not only internally within your organization, but how you're working with your suppliers and telling that story. And we often find that sales and marketing teams need to be very comfortable and confident when they speak. If they want to do well when they're telling that story, they want to be very confident and comfortable how they say it. So getting them educated is really important. And then educating these folks on the basics of what's required as part of your sustainable supply chain strategy, and how they can communicate these successes to your customers is going to be very critical. Also, training your suppliers. I mentioned a little earlier that we're preparing for this big supplier sustainability summit that we're going to be doing. Here's an example again of our questionnaires that we utilize. But imagine if you're a supplier in Asia and you get this, you may not even understand what is pre-consumer, post-consumer content. So being able to have these various conferences or seminars using surveys to understand their understanding of these things is going to help you, because think about it, you're reaching out to a supplier one level down, then they're probably have a couple suppliers that they get products and materials from that they're going to have to reach out. So the more they understand these things, the better they're going to be able to help you to meet your objectives and get the information you need within your supply chain. And I think it's really important for you to be open to ideas. You know, getting this feedback from the suppliers is going to help you really adapt, develop your training, develop your messaging with them, and getting them to provide good information. If you remember a couple webinars back, we talked about how Coca-Cola brought all their suppliers together and they got over 200 ideas the first year on how they can improve overall sustainability aspects from purchasing and logistics and packaging and all kinds of things. So remember to utilize those folks as you're developing your whole strategy. Another thing, external communication is critical. I encourage everybody we work with and everybody that attends our seminars and our trainings, the fact that you're learning about this, the fact that you're preparing all these different strategies and tools and everything else means you're a leader. So go out and use them to sell. Being able to communicate this information, you know, might reap some good benefits. You know, maybe you become a preferred or sole vendor to retailers or other customers. Or in the Wyndham example, I know one thing that they're looking to do is, you know, they want, for big corporate organizations that have their folks traveling all the time, they want to be the preferred hotel for different companies. So being able to communicate how they're working with their supply chain and how they're doing sustainability internally is really good for that. And I can tell you for sure that folks that aren't being innovative are going to lose sales and aren't really communicating this in a primary way is going to be really important. And let's not forget government contracting. Let's not forget, you know, green building projects. All these different things. It's a new world right now in how you talk about this and how you communicate it. It is definitely the age of transparency. And then what's a great way to get this word out? Well, there's a lot of things you can do. You can do it in your sustainability reports. This is an example of the BMW sustainability report. They actually have a whole section in there on supplier management and how they're working with their suppliers and how they're driving that. You can do it on fact sheets or brochures on a website or in press releases. Or you can get third-party certified, you know, to say that you've had a supply chain audit done or have somebody to, you know, work with you. But sharing milestones and goals and getting that information out to, you know, everybody that you work with is a great way to communicate this. So you can see that sustainability just isn't all about, you know, reducing your carbon footprint. It's about talking about how are we working with people, how are we working with suppliers, how are we, you know, ensuring that our services or products are, you know, we're reducing the impact to the extent possible, and how are we, you know, ensuring that our supply chain is doing the right thing from a social perspective, from an environmental perspective, and the economic benefits definitely will come from that. So basically, what's the roadmap to success here? Definitely communication, both internally and externally, having that training and follow-up, using surveys to get information from your supply chain, very important. And then how do you ensure implementation of these initiatives? It's basically institutionalizing it as much as possible. Always measuring progress. So every year you're going to be, you know, doing more as you try new things and you start to get feedback and you start to get your surveys and questionnaires back, or you test out your new responsible sourcing strategy and policy. You're always going to be looking for continuous improvement. I always say that, you know, sustainability is, you know, it's not a sprint, it's definitely a marathon, and it's going to take a long time to test things, try things, and get successes over time. So one last reminder, definitely please register if you're looking to attend our seminar. Like I said, everything's customized. We want to get it all developed and, you know, get content that's very specific for you, make you very specific workshops. You will be taking home a workbook and developing an action plan, and just about everybody that's ever attended our seminars in the past has actually taken what they learned and implemented it. You know, this isn't just show up and have a nice day together. This is show up, learn, make an action plan, go out and implement your action plan, and then we have 3 months of follow-up where we do a call each month for 3 months after the seminar. So there's a lot of great things that happen in this seminar. Also, I just want to remind everybody that we are having another webinar, which will be on March 9th at 12 p.m., and we're going to be talking about moving beyond your supply chain responsibility. Also, we're going to be having a information session. If anybody wants to learn more about the seminar and ask questions, we're going to be having an open session to allow people to learn more about exactly what we're covering in the seminar and that kind of thing, and that'll be on February 26th at 12 p.m. So if you're interested, you can join that as well. And now I'm down to, I have 1 or 2 minutes here. I have a couple quick questions. This question came in and says, how can a company change communication style for millennials? Well, that's an interesting question. If you think about it, what are millennials going to want to hear? What are they going to want to see? First of all, think about it. Millennials are used to tweeting and texting 140 characters, so your messaging needs to be short, it needs to be concise, and it needs to be very specific and very visual. Since many of these folks, I even look at my own daughter, she's had a cell phone since she's probably been 14 or 15, and that's all they know. They gain information really quickly, so being able to make communication styles that they're going to get in a quick bite is going to be the ticket, I think, for working with millennials. So that's a really great question. And then the next question I have here, what is the best way to get a good supply chain conference organized, and what would you do there? Well, when it comes to organizing a supply chain conference, you're definitely going to want to, number one, invite your key suppliers. I mean, depending on how big you are, some of our companies we work with have 2,000, 3,000, 10,000 suppliers that they work with. So to get them all into one room is going to be really critical. So what we typically do is say, look at your top spend, your biggest suppliers where you might have the most impact. Definitely get them invited, do a pre-conference survey to understand exactly their understanding of some of your requirements. Maybe have a webinar or two before the conference to get them up to speed, and then get them to come to this conference. And at the conference, you want to definitely have it set up where you're going to be presenting not only what your company's vision is, what are the expectations, but you really want to give the messaging of it's a partnership, it's a collaboration, we all win if we do well. Because think about it, if you're a company that sells products, the more products you sell, the more your suppliers benefit. So if you're asking them to provide chemical information, or if you're asking them to do something from a social perspective or contractually, they have to realize there's something in it for them and they're going to win. A lot of times these supply chain conferences people get asked, the suppliers get asked to reduce costs in some way. So giving them tools to figure out how to do that, whether it's teaching them about energy efficiency, or if you're going to teach them about, these different regulations that you're having to comply with, whether it's conflict minerals or Prop 65, or if you have internal requirements like recycled content, really educating them on what it means, how they can answer the questions, what tools you're giving them, and all that kind of thing is going to be really critical. So I think good conference planning, a lot of feedback, a lot of collaboration, getting input, using it as a means of developing your strategy is going to be really important. So anyway, that's the end of our time. I'm sorry I went a little over here, but a lot to cover. And really thank you all for joining today. Looking forward to seeing those of you that are registered already for the seminar on April 20th. I'll be talking with some of you on the 26th and then on the 9th of March. But please, like I said, register as soon as possible so we can finish developing our content for the seminar. Have a great day, and thank you again for joining today.